All right, so the story of the hadith is, a very interesting story because it started with suppression of the hadith by the Prophet ﷺ, and he did not give an explanation. It was assumed, so there won't be any confusion with the Quran. That justification for the suppression is weak because the hadith and the Quran are very, very, very different. Especially someone who is so versatile in Arabic. It's almost nonsensical explanation because, even to this day, with our deterioration in Arabic language, you could easily spot the difference between hadith and the Quran. So for someone at that time to actually confuse hadith with the Quran is not a very strong statement. But the key point here is the Prophet, at least there is no report that he said why. So to answer your question, how do they justify that? Well, they simply justify that by saying he changed his mind. If you put the reason as he didn't want the hadith to be confused with the Quran, then the fact that he changed his mind becomes sort of palatable. And of course, they cite a hadith about why he changed his mind. One of the hadiths that they cite about changing his mind, in that hadith, he said to Abdullah ibn Umar, he said, it was Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As. He told him, write down everything I say. And there's nothing that I say is not absolutely true. Now that hadith is very problematic because we know for a fact that is not the case. The Prophet ﷺ had situations where he was talking from his own experience. And the issue of...
But isn't it understood that he's talking about the deen when he says that, not about everything in life?
Well, again, that's the difficulty with hadith. You're getting a very, very short slice in time. You're sort of getting a snapshot. Like you're getting a still picture and you're trying to make a story out of it. So no, it's not understood because because that is pretty much the only evidence you have for the fact that he changed his mind. And that evidence is, within the text itself, is contradictory. The other evidence that people rely on to say that he changed his mind can be clearly dismissed as exceptions. And you obviously have to go back to those hadiths, and they're always cited. But then there is the other explanation of this whole thing. If he truly changed his mind, and if he truly said to this particular child, who was a child at the time, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, write down everything I say.
Who was a child at the time?
Yeah.
It's kind of strange, right?
Well, maybe a teenager. Okay. You're gonna have to actually do the numbers and see where. But he was young. He's considered without question from Sighar al-Sahaba.
Sighar as in the
young Sahaba. So if that was truly the case, then people have questions. Well, where is the Khutab al-Jum'ah? Why were the Khutab al-Jum'ah were not documented? Why did the Sahaba, the atmosphere against hadith, continue to be negative for the remainder of the Sahaba generation, and the generation after, and the generation after? Again, we're talking about the documentation. Like, for example, there's a very famous story about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq burning a hadith. There's a similar story about Umar al-Khattab burning a hadith. There is a story about Umar al-Khattab grabbing Abu Huraira and telling him, you either will stop narrating a hadith or I will send you back where you came from. Abu Huraira himself says in one of the hadiths, I narrated so many hadiths after Umar ibn al-Khattab because I couldn't narrate it at the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab. So the atmosphere continued to be negative toward documentation of the hadith during the life of the companions. So how does that fit with the fact that Prophet changed his mind? It doesn't fit, it doesn't flow. We don't see books that were actually compiled at the time of the Sahaba. Sure, there's one random book that we never got. It's called Sahif al-Sadiqa, that supposedly belongs to Abdullah ibn Amr al-As. But aside from the fact that we never got it, and aside from the fact that people talked about it, said it's of no value, there is no books that were documented at that time. If the Prophet ﷺ said, write down what I'm saying, you'd think people would write down what he's saying. But no. The generation after, you started seeing very, very small notes. Very small notes that people, it's like maybe the beginning of a hadith or something, but so they can just remember. Because you need some kind of note to remind yourself. But they were very personal notes. They were so personal that people, before they died, they would write in their will, when I die, burn my notes. And this continued until year 100 almost. When Umar ibn Abdul Aziz told them to write down the hadith. So how can you explain 2 to 3 generations after the Prophet that the atmosphere toward documenting hadith was still very much negative? You can't. It's a contradiction. It's a story. That's what it is. You know, it's a story to justify what is to come later. So people then started writing down in the 2nd century. But then something interesting happened. And that by itself is something that people need to stop and think about. I'm gonna do a thought experiment with you, okay? Ma'azallah, you're a very good man, and I know you're good, and I declare that you're good. But let's just say you are wicked, and you wanted to hurt Islam, and you're living at that time, okay? You can't touch the Quran. There's absolutely nothing that you can do that you can change a letter in the Quran. So what do you think you're gonna do? And everybody's writing down hadith. What could you possibly do? And you're wicked, and you're not alone. There's like a gang of you people. You're gonna make up stuff. That's exactly what was happening. By the time heavy hadith scholars like Bukhari and Muslim were at works, some people say there was as many as 1 million hadith. Ahmad ibn Hanbal said he chose his book. It was 40,000 hadith. He chose his book out of alf is a million. I mean, you have to go back and try to live that world where you have an astronomic explosion in the number of hadiths. And then you have to understand why. You have to ask yourself why. I mean, the beginning doesn't justify the end. I mean, suppress for like 100 years, and then boom, mushrooms. I mean, where did they come from? You know? So you have to ask yourself, because as you ask yourself, you're going to understand more about how there were reasons why that happened. Wicked people were one of them, but it's not the only one. And yes, at the end of the day, people were in this mess, and they needed to make sense out of that mess. So they started writing down criteria. Of course they did. I mean, you can't just take everything at face value. And remember, there were many conflicts at the time. I mean, we're talking just epistemology, but the reality is everything was happening simultaneously. Like the Sunnah were fighting with Shia and the other sects like the Khawarij, and there was the Mu'tazila, and then there's political fighting also. There's how the political theory was generated, and there's a million reasons. And then there's the political system needed to administer the land, and it was massive, and they needed some kind of law. Plus, it became a prestige issue. Like if you're narrating a hadith, it became a prestige issue, especially if you're narrating a hadith that it's like a commodity you're providing. But guess what? If you're providing the same commodity that the next guy is providing, you're not so unique. But if you had a hadith that no one heard of, you become unique, and people want to come and it's like, you know, the YouTube channels right now. You know, if you have like this, you know, attractive video, people would come and you get views and stuff. Same thing. So there was that whole world needs to be, you know, needs a volumes of study if you really want to go down it.
Okay, but what do you say to someone who hears this and then just sees a very cynical view of the entire process. Like, what about, you know, some kind of faith in, you know, in our scholars and the good people, you know, that were there. Because you like right now you're painting a picture of a bunch of really nasty people that just want to destroy Islam, or not necessarily destroy Islam, but maybe just want to get some kind of profit and benefit for themselves. And you know, it seems a little bit, you know.
What I'm suggesting is that we build on the work of those scholars. They did a monumental work. In fact, they did a work that we cannot replicate right now, because that work relied on assessing the narrators, assessing al-rijal, ilm al-rijal. We cannot duplicate that right now because we are centuries. The only thing we can do is rely on the testimonies. I mean, we have those testimonies; they're documented, but that's it. I mean, you're not living in that environment. Even the scholars that, like Bukhari and Muslim, they actually relied on testimonies that weren't contemporary also. So the whole thing is probabilistic. So what I'm saying is, they did their part, they did a great job in relation to the Sanad, or the chain of the men. And that's Mustalah 1.0. Mustalah is the knowledge about how to purify the hadith. What we need to do is Mustalah 2.0. Because their product is a leaps and bounds better than what was before, where everything was a mess. But their product is not final. I mean, we're assuming it's final. We're assuming it's final because we are under the influence of taqleed. Why is it final? Yeah, why is it final? Why do we have to say it's final? No, we can work on it. We can build on it. We can have Mustalah 2.0 that is built around the matan. Because we know for a fact there are hadiths right now we know for a fact there are hadiths that belong to that category that are nonsensical. Like hadiths of the black sesame seed. You know, and we can recite some of those. Like the hadiths of the Dajjal. They're contradictory. One says he's in an island, another says he's the son of a Jewish parents in the Medina. When you see those contradictions, I mean, to me, that doesn't tell me, I mean, if you want to take a negative view and say, oh, this is unreliable, let's just dump the whole thing. That's one approach. I'm not saying that's the right one. I'm saying is let's build on it. They were working, right? They were working. Why are we assuming the work is done? Why? Let's continue. Let's pick up where they left off, and try to purify some more.
And to be clear, when you pick up where you left off, you can't. You need a new way of looking at it. Because we can't.
2.0.
Yeah, we can't look at the Senate anymore, right? So you're
that science is a done deal.
Yeah.
There is nothing absolutely you or me or anyone on this planet can add to. The only thing you can add is, like, let's say if one of narrators, somebody sort of said he's an okay guy, okay, and let's say just theoretically somebody like Bukhari considered this hadith sahih, and then you have a problem with it, and then you go back to the Sanad and you say, well, you know what, Bukhari had criteria, but the application of that criteria on this particular hadith, maybe he was a little soft. You can go back and do some of that. But at the end of the day, that is...
You're not going to get much out of it.
You're not going to get much, and it's a really complicated route. Well, you could sort of try to go somewhere where the money is, so to speak, which is a matan. In a nutshell, matan is the sentence after the narrations, what actually the alleged the prophet said. And then there's so analyzing the narrators, that's human opinion. I mean, as much as you want to quantify it, at the end of the day, it's subjective. The actual that they met, you always rely on some kind of testimony that they met. That's also human opinion. How this testimony got to you, because it's not contemporary testimony. In fact, a lot of, within the Mustalah, a negative contemporary testimony is null and void, because it could be driven by jealousy. So how this testimony got to you, it's exactly the same thing, like the mechanism of hadith. It's a narration. The issue that the entire Muslim population that was alive and a Muslim at the time of the Prophet, that is the definition of Sahaba, and all of them are, you give them the thumbs up, and there is no question whatsoever that you do about them. That is an assumption. We know for a fact there was munafiqeen. And even if there weren't munafiqeen and everybody had integrity, and this is what they call adalat sahaba, well, what about dabt al-sahaba? Because the other dabt is, so every narrator has to have two things. They have to have integrity, and they have to have, like they know what they're saying. They have to be like on top of their game, accurate of some sort. So, when you expand the definition of Sahaba to everyone who was alive and Muslim at the time of the Prophet, which includes literally tens of thousands of people, that's that's an assumption that you're saying everybody is adil. And then nobody talks about the other issue, which is dabt. And why is this a value? Because sometimes the hadith is narrated by Sahabi, but the Sahabi didn't hear it from the Prophet. He did irsal. He heard it from another Sahabi. But at that time when he was narrating it, the whole concept of hadith and sunnah is still generations to come. So it's not like, he would just say the Prophet said so. So he wouldn't necessarily say, Sahabi Fulani told me that the Prophet said so. He wouldn't say it. It's just not practical. What was the criteria to come? He had no clue what was going to happen. So there's a lot of assumption. The other assumption that goes into this is that actually they narrated it word for word. They didn't narrate it by meaning. That's a huge assumption, because for every hadith when you do the search, you find like at least 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50, sometimes up to 100 different versions of the hadith. And they're always differ by a word here or a word there. So did he actually say it 100 times? Of course not. Obviously there's some narration by meaning. It's not word for word. And that's what logical. I mean, you can't possibly narrate something word for word unless you're reciting it time and time and time and time and time again, like the Quran. That's why tawatur is so different from non-tawatur. That's why non-tawatur needs the science of mustalah hadith to purify, while tawatur doesn't need the science of mustalah hadith. All of these sort of paint a picture of a probabilistic source. And the early scholars, they were very much conscientious about this. And they said this is a probabilistic source. Even now we're talking about the hadiths that are sahih, considered authentic, they are saying this is a probabilistic source. But the utility of it is the issue. And especially the people that came after, when they consider it basically on equal ground. Practically they're considering on equal ground with the Quran. And to justify that, then you bring the theory of the al-wahyin to practice. That was initiated by Imam Shafi'i. So that is the chronology of the second source, which is hadith. Now the chronology of the conflicts. You have conflicts that are separated by three distinct domains. Let's start another one.